So let's take a look at what we can do, for example, with our camera. If I go to the camera option, we can switch it from perspective to orthographic or panoramic. But let's go to perspective and we can play with the focal length. The smaller, for example, this number, you see that the icon of my camera changes. The more, for example, my camera turns into a wide angle shot. And the more I increase this number, the more I simulate, for example, zooming in or a tailor shot. I could press S to scale this icon down. It doesn't really change the camera, it's just visually changing it. And maybe I have to move this camera back a little bit more. And I found values between 55 and 75 somewhat good to simulate maybe the way how your eyes see it. Because you want to find a balance between kind of like a look where you have some sort of perspective for shortening or falling lines, but you don't want it too strong. Of course, if you are inside an interior space and you need to see a lot, then maybe going more with an artificial focal length might show you more of your object. You might have noticed that if you go with a camera into a room and start taking pictures, it's very difficult to really capture the environment with a camera because your eyes see it differently. So you want to make renderings more appear the way how your eyes can see it than necessarily how you could only capture it with a real camera, which is why I said something like 55, 75, 90, it's in that area for me feels more the way how your eyes would see it. You can also play with degrees if you want to. Honestly, very often I play with these values but check my environment or the render result, and when I find something that feels good, I just leave it at that value. Then for display, there's not really a lot we can really use in this area. But for example, here, passbar 2, you can see you can darken those areas. That can be really useful if you want to focus only on what can be visible inside your rendering. You also have composition guides. You can, for example, turn on the center composition guides or center diagonal, thirds, or golden angle, triangle, harmonic triangles. So that's, for example, quite good to play with the composition. If you're familiar with photography, you know that wherever you have those lines crossing, maybe you want to put your focal point or your focus of your image so that the rendering looks less boring, but a little bit more dramatic. And for example, this composition, it's very simple, but it looks somewhat more attractive than, for example, a directly face on like this. It's nice and even, but boring. So maybe let's put this one to here. And then we also have something called depth of field, and that's very easy to use. So depth of field actually means, as it says, where part of your image is sharp and where the rest of your image will become blurry. So to demonstrate this, I'm actually going to duplicate this sphere and just move it down to there, and I'm just scaling this down a little bit. And I'm going to maybe put it to there. Okay, so here is my camera empty. And I can use actually this camera empty to define where I want my focus to be. And currently you see inside the rendering, it's nice and sharp because I don't really have any size yet. But if I put, for example, 2 in, or 1 or 0.5, you see that you get different blurriness values. And if I select this empty now and maybe move it to there, so it's somewhat close to where my main focus point for my object is, you can see that the sphere in the background is actually blurry, because from here to the camera and from here away from the camera, my image will get blurred. But what is kind of like perpendicular to the camera at this point will be transparent. Not transparent, will be in focus. Maybe that's a little bit difficult to visualize, so I'm going to add another plane right where this object is, so where my empty is. And then I'm going to make this plane actually parent to this empty. So whenever I move this empty, my plane moves with it, and then I'm going to make this plane actually look at this camera. So yeah, perfect. Okay, good. Now I'm going to give this a red color, and I also do it for the viewport, so you can start seeing what I mean. I hide those for a second, turn the rendering off. So you see this red line, that's basically your picture plane, like what I'm seeing here. Everything on this plane in the space would be perfectly sharp, and everything going to the front and going away from the camera will be increasingly blurry. And you see how, for example, this plane always rotates because it's always perpendicular to my camera. So if I, for example, would like to have maybe the middle of this sphere somewhat in focus, I will need to position my empty somewhat in a way that maybe this plane intersect with, for example, half of the sphere, but still then having those third corners at my sphere, kind of like this. So let's put this one onto a different layer, turn my lights back on, and click render. And there you can see now that most of the sphere is in focus, and then the back is not in focus. So let's do this maybe with my back sphere. So you can see how this plane intersects with that sphere. So you see, I don't necessarily need to put that empty right onto the object. I just need to think about the picture plane that's always perpendicular to the camera. And if you follow the step, setting your depth of field correctly, and then also maybe using the compositional guides, is actually very, very easy then to create good looking renderings and depth of fields. But a small note, don't overdo the depth of field. Some people just make stuff too blurry. Just a small hint of blurriness is really very often enough. You don't really need more. And if you're not familiar with radius, you can also play with the f-stop if you want to. So there are different approaches. You can also play with the blades and rotation. But again, like with the lens, I quite often simply play with the values till visually I get more what I'm looking for.